On Peter Parker's first day at Midtown High School, a fight between Doctor Strange and a symbiotic alien of some sort ends up destroying the school. During the fight, Peter rescues another freshman named Nico, but he falls unconscious after being bitten by a spider that emerged from Doctor Strange's portal. Several months later, Peter has developed spider-like abilities and is secretly operating as the vigilante known as Spider-Man. Now, I don't know if this spider is from another dimension or not, but I'm willing to bet that this is not the way that Tom Holland's Spider-Man was bitten. After all, he never mentioned anything about seeing Doctor Strange in a fight before, and he seemed pretty confident when he told Ned that the spider that bit him was dead. Now, I know that this version of Spider-Man isn't technically the same as Tom Holland's, but the show was originally conceived as Tom Holland's origin story, which is why there are so many similarities between the two versions. Which means that while the series may not technically be canon to the proper MCU timeline, it does act as a giant what-if scenario that is MCU adjacent, and I personally think that's pretty cool, especially since the differences, or even the similarities for that matter, will be able to provide new context to events that did happen within the MCU. For example, when we were first introduced to Peter Parker in the MCU, Tony Stark described him as being a dumpster diver, but that aspect of his personality was never explored in any of the subsequent projects that featured Spider-Man, which I thought was rather interesting. But this series showed us that this version of Spider-Man merely saw a DVD player in a dumpster while he was eating a pizza in an alley. So the dumpster diver moniker provided by Stark was merely a snarky comment that wasn't necessarily accurate. And I'm sure this little moment won't be the only one that expands on pre-existing MCU lore, especially since the show was originally going to be MCU canon. But I understand why the showrunners decided to not make the series canon, because an origin story that didn't feature any of the characters from Spider-Man's rich comic book catalog does sound like it would be limiting. Which means that being set free from the MCU timeline was probably the best thing that ever could have happened for this show. And that's coming from someone who was interested in seeing Tom Holland's origin story. But in this new universe, Peter and Nico end up becoming best friends, and they both attend Rockford T. Bales High School after the destruction of Midtown High. Also worth noting is the fact that we don't see what happened to the spider that bit Peter, so it'll be interesting to see if it'll come back in any way, shape, or form. But after returning home one day, Peter and his Aunt May are greeted by none other than Norman Osborn, which means that Norman basically acts as Tony Stark's replacement in this episode, as he offers Peter an exclusive internship at his company, Oscorp. And I've seen some people take issue with this plot twist, but I really don't mind it. Seeing how Osborn's influence over Peter will shape his future, as opposed to Tony Stark, does sound admittedly interesting to me. So I do want to see how this relationship will develop, especially since this version of Peter was stupid enough to think that a corporate building like Oscorp wouldn't have security cameras. Seriously, I don't know what this kid was thinking. I mean, he left his internship to stop a random fire, and he didn't even wait till he left the building to change into his spider suit. The guy definitely needs to learn how to better manage his priorities. I get that he wants to do the right thing, but he can't possibly think that he can stop every fire to ever exist, especially while he's at work. But Peter does have some interesting character moments here, since he convinces a store owner to forgive a thief that was simply down on her luck, and he takes the time to save some fish when he used their tank to put out a fire. He's a good kid. So even if he isn't my favorite version of Spider-Man, I still like seeing how kind-hearted he actually is. And I liked seeing how his best friend is a girl who has a crush on his crush. I like how the jockey characters aren't depicted as simple, stereotypical jocks, and I even like the comic booky art style of the show in general. I just don't particularly like the animation itself because it looks a little stiff and wonky and awkward at times. I mean, it's not terrible, I guess. It's just nowhere near as impressive as X-Men 97's. But at least it is a bit more stylistic than What If's animation, and I think that perfectly summarizes how I feel about the series so far. I may not have been as instantly blown away by the premiere like I was with X-Men 97, but I'm already more invested in this story than I ever was with the What If series. So even though Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man may not be Marvel's best animated endeavor, it definitely has the potential to improve over time. Hopefully that means the show will have better animation, dialogue that is less clunky, and voice acting that feels a bit more natural as the show progresses. But speaking of the voice acting, I'd like to take a moment to talk about Hudson Thames's portrayal of the titular character. Because I really liked Thames's depiction of Spider-Man in Season 1 of What If, but his portrayal of the character here is definitely different. And I guess that makes sense since this is a different version of the character after all, but I wasn't expecting the character to be portrayed the way that he is. And that's not necessarily a big deal. I just need time adjusting to this new awkward, quirky, and Gen Alpha depiction of Pete. But there is a bigger elephant in the room, which is the fact that Thames made a weird comment about feeling relieved to see that this show wasn't annoying or woke. Because this is a show that features a main character that is either gay or bisexual, two iconic comic book characters that are race swapped, and an iconic comic book character that is both race and gender swapped. If that's not what people describe as woke, then I don't know what is. So what the fuck do people even mean when they say this word anymore? I don't know, but this is a very inclusive show that clearly has a thing or two to say about diversity, and that is not inherently a bad thing. So, despite what issues I may have with this show, its wokeness is definitely not one of them. At any rate, I think Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man is off to a decent start, and I definitely want to see where this series will be heading. And that's more than I can say for all of the other animated Spider-Man shows that exist, because as much as I do love Spider-Man, I just don't have the time to watch every animated project that the character has ever appeared in. I'm not even sure if I would have started this series if it wasn't MCU adjacent in the first place. But I am glad that I did, because the premiere has certainly piqued my interest. And even if this show never manages to match my love for Spider-Man the animated series, I think it can prove to be a pretty decent show in its own right. So I am looking forward to seeing the next episode of Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man once it gets released on Wednesday.